In Texas, full anonymity and privacy are two different things when we're talking about your corporate filings. I'll show you what the missteps are and how people actually put their family in harm's way in cases like this. My name is Dustin Lee. I run a business law firm in Texas where we help business owners form companies, do their state filings, their contracts and transactions, and we also handle business disputes. If you're looking to form an anonymous LLC in Texas, let me tell you, the system in Texas is not set up for you to disappear or avoid liability. But what you can do is dramatically reduce the amount of your personal information that ends up in the public record if you do some careful planning on the front end. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through 4 things. Number 1, what does anonymous LLC really mean in Texas, and what's the difference between anonymous and privacy? The second thing I'm going to tell you about is how does your personal information actually end up in the public record in Texas? The third thing is the legal tools that you can use to try to protect your privacy. And then the fourth thing is the most common mistakes that people usually make that end up in their personal information on the internet or in the public record. By the end of the video, you should know what's actually possible, what's not possible, and you should understand the difference between anonymous and private, at least as far as Texas entity formations are concerned. Now, please keep in mind this information is just general information. The video is informational and educational. It's not meant as legal advice, and it's certainly not meant to be advice about any particular situation. If you have legal questions, you need to contact an experienced business lawyer in your jurisdiction. So if you're thinking you're going to form an anonymous LLC in Texas, you've probably been misled a little bit. Now, there are some creative ways that you can try to do that, but for the most part, what you're thinking of, what most people commonly think of as an anonymous LLC, is not really possible in Texas because of the level of detail that you have to give on the state filings that you file, both when you file a certificate of formation and then also the annual filings called the public information reports. Anonymity really means that nobody could ever connect you with the company, but that's really not possible in today's world where you've got the IRS, the bank, and potentially your creditors of the company. There are things that we could do to protect your private personal information when you form an entity, like your personal address, your personal phone number, your personal email address, things like that. So it's different than being anonymous, but there are a lot of privacy concerns just from having that little bit of information floating around. So when we're talking about privacy planning, we're really not talking about full anonymity. We're talking about limiting the amount of personal information of yours that's floating around in public record and on the internet. Because of course, there are all types of companies that go out and scrape the public record and then disseminate your public personal information all over the internet. So to avoid that, we like to avoid having any personal information applied in your LLC documents if we can. And that privacy planning is really important to do when we start forming the entity, not later on. Okay, so next we're going to talk about how does your information actually get into the public record with your Texas state business entity filings? The first way is your certificate of formation. There's a few exposure points on there. The first thing on your certificate of formation that's an exposure point is the initial mailing address of the entity. If you list your home address on there, then your home address is going to be in the public record. To avoid that, you could potentially get a virtual office or a physical mailing address for your business that is not your home address. Also, in cases like this, a post office box can work for that initial mailing address, but not for your registered agent address, which we'll get to in a moment. The second potential exposure point on that certificate of formation is the address for the manager or the managing member. Again, if you list your personal home address on here, then that's going to be in the public record available for anyone to see. So again, you're probably going to want to look at getting a virtual office, a mailbox, something like that, where you can be reached at a different address that's not your personal home address. And then the third thing is the registered agent. Describing what a registered agent is a little bit outside of the scope of this video, but essentially, to break it down quickly, the registered agent is a person that's going to be available during business hours to accept service of process of a lawsuit for your business or accept official mail for the business. And again, if you list your name and your home address, then you've got a potential exposure point for your personal information there. The second way that people get their personal information exposed through their state filings is in Texas. It's called the public information report. In other states, it may be called like an annual report or an annual disclosure, something like that. In Texas, we call it a public information report. And again, that's going to be an exposure point where you're listing both the entity's address and the manager's address or the managing member's address. And if you list your personal address on any of those public information reports, boom, now your address is in the public record. So I would not list my home address on there if I had another way to do it. And there's a lot of different ways that you can try to find to avoid that. And again, we're not talking about avoiding liability here. We're not talking about avoiding creditors. We're really just talking about making sure that your home address isn't something that someone can find just because they look up your business. So what tools and planning can you use to protect your privacy when you're forming your LLC and doing your state filings? Well, the first thing that you can do is that you can hire a professional registered agent. Lots of business lawyers will do this for you as part of their sort of annual service package for the business. And then also there are professional companies out there, a number of them, that will provide this annual registered agent service for you. And so when you go to list one of these companies or your lawyer as registered agent on the certificate of formation, now you're not putting down your own personal name and your own home address. Likewise, if you are going to be available during all business hours at your business address, if it's a physical space where someone can come and hand you papers, then you could do that. But a lot of times people are out in the field or they're busy doing whatever project it is, whatever deliverable it is. They can't always be available. And that's really the purpose of the professional registered agent. Number one, to shield your privacy. And then number two, to make sure that you don't miss anything important, like the service of process of a lawsuit. Okay, so the second way that you can help protect your own personal privacy is to get what we were talking about before, like a virtual office address, or obviously a physical office would be great. And then on top of that, you could get maybe a post office box or a mailbox at one of the mailbox type of stores. Any of these things are going to allow you to list this other address, your business address, on your initial mailing address and your manager's address in a way that's going to allow you to receive mail at that address, but in a way that's not going to expose your home address. Because really what we're trying to avoid here, we're trying to avoid having your home address end up in public record and then therefore all over the internet, because anything that's in public record is all over the internet, which leads to spam mail, spam calls, so on and so forth. In addition to that, if you do use the professional registered agent, it's a pretty big benefit, because if you ever do get sued, you don't have the constable or the process server showing up at your house in front of your family, your neighbors, handing you a lawsuit. It can be embarrassing, and it's really something that most people would like to avoid. But again, that's a good benefit of having that professional registered agent, to make sure they accept the service of process of that lawsuit for you, so you don't have people showing up at your house. And then obviously not having your home address in public record is really important. So if you have a disgruntled customer or something like that, they don't just come look you up and show up at your house. So you may have heard, go file in Delaware or Wyoming or somewhere that they allow a truly anonymous LLC to be formed, and then just register it in Texas. Well, here's the problem with that. If you do that, when you go to register in Texas, Texas still requires all the disclosure of this information. Still requires you to file that initial filing with the state of Texas. It's a different filing, but it still requires information on it. And then, of course, once you get it filed and your entity is up and running, you're still required to file those public information reports every year. So even if you have an anonymous entity from a different state, there's a good chance that you're still going to have to be disclosing a lot of this stuff in your Texas filings. Now, there are some complex ways that you might be able to get around that and have a truly anonymous LLC operating in Texas, but it can be very, very difficult, time consuming, and just honestly a headache to structure. And when you're looking at that, you kind of have to weigh the cost and also the complexity of the operations, the complexity of the state filings and tax filings for having these multiple layers of entities that would allow you to be truly anonymous, because most of the time either people do it wrong or the structure is just extremely complicated, time consuming, and expensive to keep up. So whether or not you structure in a complicated way using an anonymous LLC from another state that's now going to be doing business in Texas, or if you just choose to file straight here in Texas and keep the structure nice and simple, you just have to understand that privacy and anonymity are two different things. And really what we try to focus on the most is maintaining your privacy to make sure that your personal information, like your email address, phone number, and home address, don't get out into the public. When you do that, it doesn't stop someone from suing your company. It doesn't stop any liability that the company might have. It really is just to protect your own personal information, especially that really critical stuff about your home address, home phone number, the things that you really don't want floating around the internet. So these privacy things, they're not going to stop legitimate creditors, attorneys from filing against your entity if they need to file a lawsuit. But what it is doing is protecting your personal privacy. All right, now let's talk about some common mistakes that I see be in formations and state filings that can end up in your personal information floating around the internet. So the first one is just quickly clicking through or not really being very thoughtful about a DIY entity formation. And you end up listing your personal address because you don't have anything else and you just want to get the entity formed right away. And then that information ends up on the certificate of formation that's in the public record for forever. You can go back and change it with an amendment, but that original certificate is always going to be in the public record. So you want to make sure that you get this right with thoughtful planning on the front end. The second mistake I see is when people properly list a business address and a registered agent address on their initial filing with the state, and then when a year goes around and they need to file their public information report, now they slip up and they put their home address and their personal information on the public information report. And now again, it's permanently in the public record. The third thing is acting as your own registered agent. I really do recommend that you get a professional registered agent like an attorney or a company that handles this all day, every day. It really gives you that additional level of privacy for your own home address, but then also it makes sure that you don't miss any important documents like service of process of the lawsuit. I've also seen people try to do state filings with fraudulent information like straw owners or information that's not really true and correct to try to protect their own personal privacy and maintain anonymity. And sometimes we'll see someone list only one of the business owners instead of both business owners in a situation like that, or only one manager instead of both managers, or only one managing member instead of both managing members. And what happens in a situation like that is the person that doesn't get listed actually ends up getting exposure that they're going to get cut out of this business because they've never been properly listed on state forms or on their internal documents. So you have to be very careful about doing something like that, like representing that there's only one manager or representing that there's a certain ownership percentage that doesn't really exist. And so that can really come back to bite you. And I would not recommend doing any of that, not only because it's dishonest, it's fraudulent, but from a liability perspective, it could come back to hurt you later. The ways that I've talked about in this video to protect your privacy are really the best ways to be thinking and planning ahead when you form your entity. And when you're forming your LLC or your business entity in Texas, to protect your personal information, timing really does matter. Because like I said before, if you file this certificate of formation or public information report, you can't undo that. You can't go grab that information back out of the public record. Even if you file some sort of an amendment, the original document is still going to be on file. It's still going to be in public record, and it's still going to be available to anyone who wants to search through the public record to find things like companies that scrape for your information or, disgruntled customers. So you really have to have thoughtful planning in the first place to make sure that your state filing initially and your annual filings are properly done to not expose yourself to personal privacy issues. If you're already running an LLC and you haven't really thought about this stuff before, it may be good to go back and take a look at what you've previously filed in Texas to see what's been listed and what information is currently public. I hope you found this information helpful and you've enjoyed the video. If you'd like to learn more about our law firm, please feel free to check out the description below. Now, if you're thinking about privacy, you're probably also thinking about business structure and asset protection. And what you may want to do is check out another video that we've done about making sure that your assets for the LLC, your income producing assets, are properly titled in the name of the LLC. And it talks about some of the hurdles and some of the obstacles of doing that, and then also what the problems could be if you keep those in your own personal name. So feel free to check out that video as well.